Almost 100 terrorists are being considered for release from prison by the Parole Board. There are 92 active and ongoing terror cases, some that could come before parole judges, and this will be determined next year.
But it depends on how long it takes to gather the evidence needed for hearings, as these cases are often described as complex. Terror offenders must now serve 2/3 of their sentence before being eligible for release. Well, Will Geddes is a security and terror expert. We just saw pictures of some of those cases involving terrorists who, upon being freed, committed acts of terrorism. And where does the public safety come in all this?
Well, it comes in, obviously, to a very severe and serious nature. And there have been quite a few revisions, obviously, around some of the licence conditions that have been put in place for those that have been incarcerated and sentenced for terrorism offences. And because you're absolutely right, we've seen a couple of occasions where they've either absconded from those licence conditions or they have gone on to repeat their attacks. And one of the greatest concerns is, as we try and adjust, and obviously the legal system tries to adjust accordingly to put sufficient controls around, whether it be within the TPIM measures or MAPA measures, to relocate them, keep them under house arrest, deny them access to the internet, they are getting as wise as well in terms of being able to communicate with each other.
And, Will, it was the emergency laws that were brought in last February after I think there were 2 attacks in 3 months, as Simon was saying. We just saw the pictures of them, by extremists who had been recently released from jail. So the Parole Board now have this huge responsibility, don't they, that they've changed the way that, people are freed, that would automatically be freed halfway through that sentence. That's now changed. Do you have faith in the Parole Board, and do you think that this system works?
Well, I think obviously it's got to adjust accordingly, as time develops and as you're finding inevitable weaknesses or vulnerabilities within what measures there are imposed on individuals when they have been released. Because bearing in mind, we have one of the best judicial systems in the world, which can work incredibly favourably for you, but also can work to a huge disadvantage in disabling the ability by the authorities to be able to control individuals. But again, in relative terms, the number of individuals that are being reviewed by the Parole Board are incredibly small in relative terms. There are some 16,000 cases that are reviewed every year by the Parole Board, and there is only a fraction of those, probably about 20 or so, that are reviewed, obviously, that are specifically terrorism related. But the Parole Board has been obviously under enormous scrutiny because of those repeat offenders to try and increase the number of individuals that are referred to. And these are not just Parole Board individuals, these are people within the intelligence community, these are psychiatrists and various others. But there is still this concern that it's not just those that obviously are released, it's those that are still incarcerated, still in prison, that are also fomenting those terrorist plots, preparing themselves for when they are released.
Well, I just know so many people watching this are going to be going boo-hoo. All those security officers who were responsible for putting these people behind bars in the first place must be wringing their hands. We're talking about people like Nazim Hussain. He plotted attacks alongside the London Bridge terrorist Usman Khan. Jack Coulson, who made a pipe bomb in his Nazi memorabilia-filled bedroom. The terror boss, Rangzib Ahmed. I mean, a lot of people will say when they were put in prison, we never wanted to see the key, let alone reopen the door. The Parole Board has a duty to the public, doesn't it?
Yes, it does, Simon. And I agree with everything you've just said. And if I had any sway or control over these things, then that would be pretty much my finite solution to it. But people are obviously granted some degrees of liberty or protection under the UK judicial system. But again, the Parole Board see how those weaknesses have been exploited. You see, one of the concerns is obviously in terms of the TPIM measures which are in place. And it's the monitoring, and we've got to look at the resource to obviously ensure that monitoring is managed appropriately. I mean, the TPIMs can involve the individual being entirely relocated from their past community, their past home. They can be held under house arrest for up to 18 hours a day. But again, we've seen that it doesn't necessarily work. So what the Parole Board are looking to do is increase their numbers to about approximately 70, from what I understand, of specialists that will be brought in to consult. All of these individuals will also be party to highly secretive and confidential information provided by the security services to ensure that whatever decision they make is going to be a sensible decision. I mean, and again, of 117 odd cases that have been referred to the Parole Board, Only 11 of those have actually been freed. So keeping it contextually, there are still quite a lot which are held in prison.
And Will, clearly there is still a huge problem in terms of spreading and disseminating extremism within the prison walls. The reviews that have taken place since February by the Parole Board, I think there have been something like 25. More than 50% of those cases have been refused parole. I think only 11 of them were freed. So clearly they are concerned about the safety of many of the people that they are reviewing, except those sentences will eventually be completed. They won't be able to keep them in prison indefinitely, will they?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a really valid point here, and that is about the radicalisation of individuals in prison, which is a huge problem for the prison authorities in terms of preventing that. And what often will be born from that radicalisation will be individuals that haven't necessarily gone to prison for terrorism-related offences, but because they've been afforded the protection within the community inside prison by those that are radicals, they have been radicalised by proxy, if you follow me. So it creates a concern for the security services, because whereas it was always looking externally, those working in communities, those communicating with each other, both domestically and overseas, you have this new sort of breed of terrorist that is being built in prison and then released externally. So, the Parole Board is looking at historic information, looking at individuals that have communicated and contacted other like-minded terrorists. You've now got these newborns, if you like, which have been created in prison that are now being released into the community. So, and the Parole Board doesn't necessarily have that information to be able to consider within their review.